What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined by Daniel Starkand. We're here, 6 games left in the season. It's been a roller coaster of a year. I feel like I use that word every week, but let's just start with the simple one. Daniel, how are you doing? How are you feeling at this point in the year?
I'm doing well. I could be feeling better. Like the Dodgers have won 100 games. I
Right.
should say, that's a huge accomplishment. Another great season for the boys in blue. And most of the time when you're celebrating 100 wins, with a week left in the season, you're talking about how you're going to line up your pitching for the postseason. Like how much are you resting guys at this point? Like you should have the division clinched already, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Obviously, the Giants are still 2 games ahead of the Dodgers. So it's been frustrating to say the least. But hey, it's crunch time at this point. Even if the Dodgers don't win the division, that doesn't mean their hopes of winning the World Series are dead. So I'm just ready for an exciting week of baseball and just seeing how everything ends up here.
It's crazy because if you took a pulse of the Dodger world out there and how people are feeling, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess most people would not realize the Dodgers have won 12 of their last 15 games over the last 2.5 weeks. I mean, 12-3, and yet the only number that matters is 2. They're 2 games back of the Giants with just 6 games to go. And the past 2 series even have been interesting. Matt and I were here a week ago, and I said, hey, when you're playing the Rockies and the Diamondbacks, I know they're on the road. You need at least 5 out of 6. They only get 4 out of 6. Interestingly enough, they get outscored by the Rockies, and 9-9 was the total runs in the Arizona series. So a very weird last week for the Dodgers. They go 4-2. They lose a game in the standings to go 2 back. So there's 6 games left, Daniel, and this is the headline question. How do you what odds would you put on the Dodgers winning the division, whether that's via a play-in game or whether it's outright? The Dodgers have 6 games all at home against the Padres and the Brewers, who don't have anything to play for. And then the Giants have 6 games at home against the Diamondbacks, also have nothing to play for. Just to clarify, in case people are wondering if the Diamondbacks are still playing for anything. They stopped playing for something, I think, months ago. And then the Padres. So 6 home games for both teams. Out of 100, what's the percentage chance you would put on the Dodgers winning the division? Again, that could be via a play-in game.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start off by saying that it's baseball, so anything could happen. Like we just saw the Diamondbacks you just mentioned, like
Yeah.
they beat the Dodgers once this past week, and like you said, as far as runs are concerned, they played them pretty evenly. Luckily, the Dodgers at least came away with 2 wins, but even though baseball is very random, I'm still not feeling too good. Like I wouldn't put their odds of winning the division higher than like 15% or so. It's unfortunate the Dodgers don't control their own destiny at this
Yeah.
point. Like even if they go 6-0, there's a good chance they still don't win the division. Like that would require 2 Giants losses to just tie them and force a game 163.
Yeah.
And the Giants are not playing opponents that have anything to play for at this point. Like the Diamondbacks, like you said, they're long gone. The Padres, they were just eliminated, this past weekend. So and even with that, I'm sure the Padres are going to be just as motivated as ever to play the Dodgers early in the week. Like
Yeah.
that's their World Series at this point, and then they're probably just going to lay down against the Giants to close out the year. So not feeling too good about the division, but hey, maybe that could all change tomorrow. Like if the Dodgers win tomorrow and the Giants lose and it's
Yeah.
1 game again, then you feel like you got a shot. But when it's 2, and at this point, if it gets any larger, if it grows to 3, then you could wrap it up at that point.
Yeah, Viralocity on YouTube is our most optimistic fan. That they give it a 1 in 3 chance that the Dodgers make it or win the division. We've got Craig says 20%, Vincent 10%, Jason 25%, Swaggy 15%, George 2.94%. Not sure how you calculate down to the to the hundredth there. But Max Bay, who if you follow Dodger Twitter, he's kind of a stats guy. He broke down the model based on some win probabilities and said there's 11% chance of a play-in game. So just the chance of that happening is 11%. And total, including the odds of winning a play-on game and stuff, I think he had it at about 11 or 12% would be the odds that the Dodgers would win the division outright. As you said, I mean, the Dodgers could go 6-0, and I still don't know if I would feel good. Like, if I said the Dodgers are going to go 6-0, I don't think either of us are like, oh, then 75% chance the Dodgers win the
Right.
division. Because, again, I mean, 3 games against Arizona should be automatic wins, and the Giants have been dominating the Padres of late. So it's fascinating, and yet there's context. I mean, when you think right now, like, we don't need to think back on this season because we're there. But how do you navigate, on one hand, saying the Dodgers have won 100 games? They've won 12 of their last 15. They have the second best record in baseball. Their win percentage is one of the top 3 or 4 basically in the last 65 years of the franchise. And yet they're going to play in the wild card game. Like, how do you balance? Is it entirely frustration because they weren't able to beat the Giants, a team that they're far more talented than on paper, etc.? Is it, hey, appreciate kind of the season they're having and just say, hey, you know what? Sometimes you win 100 games and it doesn't get you the division. There's not much the Dodgers could have done more. How do you balance? Which one of those two is louder in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a little bit of both. And I think, as Dodger fans, we're just so spoiled. Like
Yeah.
the last time they didn't win the division was, I think, like 2012. So we've just gotten so used to them winning the division every year that that's the expectation. With that being said, I think for me, like, as frustrating as this season has been, and like there's been a lot of moments or like a lot of games that you feel like the Dodgers should have won that they didn't, and those start to add up, and you look at a close division race and you feel like they could have been better and they should have been better and they should be winning this division. But at the end of the day, like, if you look at also everything that's gone wrong for this team this season, like all the injuries, obviously the Bauer stuff, like a number of different things didn't go their way, and they still managed to win 100 games, and they're still the second best team in baseball behind only the Giants. Like, if you look, we're just talking about the Padres, like they had a lot of things go wrong and they saw their season go completely south, and now they're a 500 team. So, we should at least be happy that's not what happened to the Dodgers. Even if they don't win the division, I still think it's been a very successful season, and I still think once you win like that 1-game wild card, and I know that's super random and anything could happen in one game, but if you win that game, then you get a normal series just like everyone else. So yes, it sucks for that, but if you could just get past that, then it's a fair, even playing field for everyone at that point.
Yeah, and you could make an argument. We don't have to dive into this right this second, but you could make an argument that whoever comes out of the wild card, the Giants might be the most desirable team to match up against of the teams that are in the postseason if you had to pick. So we won't dive into that right now. But yeah, it's just a fascinating thing because it feels so pessimistic in the moment when you're like, all you can focus on is wild card game and 2 games back. And yet when you zoom out, and look, even if you look at the 100 wins, I think it's acceptable to say this has been a bit disappointing year. When you look at the talent that the Dodgers have, the fact that they add Scherzer and Trey Turner to that, yes, there are injuries, but like I keep saying, everybody has dealt with injuries. I mean, the Bauer thing doesn't qualify as an injury, but you can't say you didn't know there wasn't some risk signing up for what they signed up for. I'm not saying you should have expected this, but it's not like this guy was, going to come in and just pencil him in to have a perfect, flawless, like drama-free season. And so when you factor all these different pieces in, it feels disappointing. And yet, to your point, like I grew up almost the entirety of my childhood being born in 1988 all the way through whatever year it was. We didn't even win we never even won a playoff series. My first playoff game was Jose Lima winning a playoff game, and they were already down 2-0 and the series was already over. So I have an appreciation to be able to say, I don't take for granted just making the playoffs. Now, the wild card, does that really count as making the playoffs with this new setup? It's a fair question. We can have that conversation another day. But there's part of me that just wants to appreciate and say, hey, this team won 100 games. Like, how many years in my life did I have to live before I could say that the Dodgers won 100 games, and should I be disappointed? Now, that's going to be my attitude, big picture, and saying, hey, this is the home of the 2020 Los Angeles World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers, and that's the other lens that I'm going to view everything through. But all that said, right now in this moment, I understand the people that are frustrated. I understand the people that are disappointed in how things have played out, and obviously, I'm as pessimistic about a 1-game wild card as anybody else. It has nothing to do with the Dodgers, has nothing to do with who will be pitching, obviously, but it's just the randomness of baseball. So enough about that. Let's dive into some of the stuff, get specific. So the plan for tonight, we're going to look back on the week that was. As we do, we'll do stock up and stock down. Lots of guys go in both directions, I'll put it that way. Then we'll look ahead to what's in front of us. 6 games left. Some topics we'll touch on. Is Walker Buehler? Are we concerned about him? His September numbers have not been pretty. Is he petering out at the wrong time? I want to ask you some questions about how you view the Dodgers rotation, whether or not how they should approach this last week. Matt Moreno gave us some spicy takes on how he would stack the Dodger rotation last week. He also had some spicy takes on who his outfield would be. So he's not here to defend himself, but that's fine. It's okay. So I want to get your thoughts on that. But let's start with stock up and stock down. Looking at the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last month, however, who are some guys in your mind that are peaking at the right times, or maybe some guys that are headed in the wrong direction? Again, we'll end this segment with the Walker Buehler conversation, so we'll save him for last.
Yeah, well, the first guy I wanted to highlight is my guy Corey Seager. It's getting late in the year. The calendar is about to flip to October, and he's turning
Yeah.
on a switch as we expected from him after what he did last year. But we talk a lot about Mookie and how the move from him to the leadoff spot, it seemed to make a difference. Well, kind of seems the same with Corey
Yeah.
Seager. He's been there the last 6 games, and in those 6 games, he's batted 375 with an OPS of an 1173. Hit a couple homers. He's walked 4 times. So, that two spot is kind of where Corey Seager's been most of his career. He seems like he's comfortable
Yeah.
there. And right now he's one of the one of the only guys on the team that's hitting. And it's the right time. It's been a kind of a frustrating year for him. He missed some time with injury. From getting hit by a pitch, like it wasn't anything of his own doing. But hey, if he gets hot and has a big October, then we'll put the regular season stuff aside.
Yeah, OPS of like 1050 over the last 2 weeks with 3 home runs. Seager's been amazing. And like you said, I mean, he was obviously the MVP of everything that happened last year. So good to see
Yeah.
that. Andrew McDaniels on YouTube says this guy, and I agree with him. Julio Urias is a stock up for me. His last 6 starts, 2.34 ERA. Another one of these guys that like the calendar's about to turn, and there's something
Yep.
that gets going with him. And as we'll talk about, the Dodger rotation as a whole has hit a little bump in the road. I'm not going to say either of us are worried, at least not big picture, but Urias has been very good. He had a rough start at the beginning of the week, comes back, has another great start to end the week, 2.34 ERA over his last 6 starts. So credit to Urias. And again, that'll be a conversation we have. Where does Urias stack up in the rotation? Is he a rotation guy? Is he a back end of the bullpen guy? We'll get to that, but Urias is going to be my first stock up.
Yeah, and him, I think something we've seen is, we've been talking for a while about his innings load.
Yep.
I think he's like right around 180 right now, which is by far a career high. But something we've kind of seen recently is, his pitch count. They haven't been, running it up in his last few starts. Like he's only been throwing kind of 5 innings, like 80 pitches. So that's kind of a mini way to rest him a little bit. Obviously, you're not skipping a start. You don't have that luxury. But if he's thrown, 80 pitches, that's probably not as stressful as, 100 plus or whatever. So I guess that's a good way to keep him fresh. And he's been, throwing well in the innings that he has thrown.
Yeah. Who do you got for number 2 on your list?
My next guy I had is AJ Pollock. He's a guy who was, arguably the best hitter on the team for a while there
Yeah.
after the All-Star break. Then he unfortunately gets hurt, sliding in the third base, and they they really missed him while he
Yeah.
was out. And when he comes back, you're kind of wondering, like, is he going to be able to pick up where he left off, or is he going to come out of the gate slow? And when these games are so important, you kind of need him to come back, and he's been performing since he got back. He's been batting 375. He hits the homer in Arizona where he's obviously very comfortable playing,
Yeah.
and he's been huge. This lineup's been kind of in the downer for a while now. So to have his production, towards the bottom of the lineup, that's been huge.
Yeah, I mean, are you surprised? Like when a guy comes back like that, obviously he wasn't gone for very long, but are you surprised that he just jumps right back in his first 3 or 4 games back? Again, the OPS is like 1.3 or something like that. So
Yeah.
were you expecting him to sort of? Obviously, I don't know if it's realistic to say, oh, he's just going to hit exactly like he was, because as you said, not only the best on the team, maybe one of the best in the National League post All-Star break, but I've just been impressed at how quickly he's reacclimated to the major league level and just, again, not just at an average level, but dominating.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't out for like, half the season or
Totally.
something. Like he was only out for a couple weeks. But with that being said, like I think he got back sooner than a lot of people, expected. He didn't really have much of a rehab assignment. So you never know what you're going to get when guys miss time and are kind of rushed to come back. And obviously these games are incredibly important. Like these are all kind of do or die games. And it's been good to see. I'm with you. I've been a little surprised that he was just able to kind of pick
Yeah.
up right where he left off, but it's been much needed. I'll say that.
Yeah, and my next stock up, I'm going to go to the bullpen. A couple guys that I wouldn't say are under the radar, but maybe they're not necessarily back end of the bullpen guys that everybody thinks of immediately. But Corey Knebel and Joe Kelly have both been fantastic of late. Looking at the last month or so, Knebel 11 and a third innings pitched, 0.79 ERA for him. Joe Kelly in his last 12 appearances, 1.69 ERA. So both of those guys, and now that's the thing about a wild card game is when you have a bullpen like the Dodgers, it kind of neutralizes that advantage because in a one game, it's all hands on deck. And so the odds are if you throw a guy like Scherzer in a wild card game, that you're probably not going to go to your fourth and fifth and sixth best relief pitcher, which is where the Dodgers have a huge advantage over others. So I would say a big stock up for me would be Knebel and Kelly, and just I've got a couple bullpen guys that are on the stock down here in just a moment, but at least those two. I mean, Knebel, I don't hear anybody talking about 0.79 ERA in the last month. That's what the Dodgers were hoping for when they signed up.
Yeah, and I think the Dodgers did a good job of kind of easing him back. He missed, a lot of time, and they didn't really put him in high leverage situations, to start off. And he's worked his way back into the mix, which has been huge. We talked about around the trade deadline how the Dodgers didn't, pick up a big bullpen guy, but we're fine with it because they made the big deal for Scherzer and Trey Turner, of course. But we're hoping that Knebel would. We knew he was coming back, and we were hoping that he'd kind of step in and be that guy. And it's looking like that. He's been looking, nasty. The velocity's been up, and obviously he's got that curveball that's just, filthy.
Yeah, I'll go to my stock down off this piggyback, and then if you've got others you want to mention. Vesia and Bickford, it hurts me to say, are my stock down here. Bickford, 4.3 ERA his last 11 appearances. I think we kind of knew there was going to be a correction at some point. He's just been so fantastic, but it's also just a brand new role, a brand new situation, a ton of innings and high leverage stuff for him. So he hasn't been terrible. 4.3 is not the end of the world, but just not nearly what you were expecting. And again, at this time of year, you start to wonder if that's a guy you can trust. Vesia has been fascinating. His ERA has been good. His FIP, or his fielding independent pitching, aka projecting based on hits and walks and all that, what his ERA should be is 6.59. He is walking almost 6.5 batters per 9 innings over the last month. That's 11 appearances in 7 innings. So again, the ERA has been good. The strikeouts are still there, but he's walking guys, putting himself in bad situations, has wiggled out of it. But when you look at Vesia and Bickford, guys that they trusted, obviously if Knebel and Kelly are pitching well, you don't need them nearly as much. Maybe Vesia, the lefty. Are you starting to lose confidence in either of those guys, or is this just a bump in the road, and once the postseason comes, you hand them the ball and no issues?
I wouldn't say starting to lose confidence, but those are definitely guys they're going to have to, rely on. Vesia's basically their only trustworthy lefty reliever, or guy that you at least hope could be trustworthy. And I think the walks are a little concerning with him. That was, when he first came up at the beginning of the year, that was his issue, and they sent him back down. He got that figured out, and he came back up, and he was just an absolute animal after that.
Yeah.
Like, he was striking out everyone. He wasn't walking anyone. So, I mean, I think with him, we've seen if he could command, the top of the strike zone with his fastball, throwing them right at the chest where you pretty much have to swing at them because they're borderline strike pitches, but they're definitely not easy to hit. That's when he's at his best. So if he's not commanding that, then we've seen him be less effective. Like you said, though, he's been able to wiggle out of jams, which is good. But it only takes one time in the postseason where there's a jam you can't wiggle out of, and that costs you a game or whatever. So yeah, you definitely want to see Vesia pounding the strike zone more and get back to the guy he was for most of this season.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat asked this question. I think it's a fair one as we're talking about lefties. Is David Price? How do you feel about where David Price is at and sort of his ability to come out of the bullpen in a big spot in the postseason?
I mean, I feel like he hasn't really pitched a whole lot as of late. I haven't looked at the numbers. I know he pitched the other day, and I think he gave up a run or two, but I feel like he's just not really on that list at the moment. Like, he might make a postseason roster as kind of a long reliever type, maybe, who like in a blowout type of game could eat some innings for you, but he really hasn't been pitching much lately, which just kind of tells me that they don't have a whole lot of trust in him. I wouldn't say it's been a bad year for him, but it also hasn't been, a great year by any means. So I don't know if he's really in the pecking order at the moment. Maybe we'll see him if, let's say, the division gets away or something. Maybe we'll see him have a longer outing kind of as an audition for a potential postseason roster, but he doesn't really seem to be, in the mix, at least for any type of leverage at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, basically since September 14th, I mean, he appeared, here are his dates. He threw 1 2/3 on September 5th. He threw 1 inning on September 14th. He threw 1 inning on September 23rd and 2/3 of an inning on September 25th. So, basically more than a month has gone by and he's thrown just 4 1/3 innings. It'll be interesting. I mean, Price is a guy who has been on the biggest stage, who has
Yeah.
come out of all sorts of roles in the bullpen and in the postseason, I should say. And so he's an interesting guy to watch in a role like that. I'll throw some other guys at you, guys that have just been positive. Trey Turner was a guy you and I mentioned offline. His slash line over the last 2 weeks, 388 average, 455 on base, 694 slug, 4 home runs, 4 stolen bases, something like 11 runs scored. So he's been fantastic. And you mentioned the Seeger shifting to the number 2 hole. Maybe Trey shifting to the number 3 hole is helping him. Here's the flip side. Mookie Betts has actually quietly been struggling pretty badly over the last 2 weeks. 226 average, 293 on base, and 283 slug with 0 home runs in his last 12 games. So Trey doing good, Mookie doing not so good. I know we've made a big deal about the lineup and how all that shakes out. Is that where you would look to? Like, I mean, is Mookie hitting leadoff somehow now a problem, or what do we make of that?
No, I don't think we could make any more changes at this point. I think we've kind of settled on what's best for right now, at least. And I don't think where someone hits in a lineup is always to blame when they struggle. And I also don't think simply moving them in the lineup is a solution to get a guy going. Like, yeah, sometimes it works. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I don't think that's always a solution. I think at some point you got to kind of settle in, at least for like your top 5 or 6 guys or whatever, kind of settle in, let them get comfortable there. The postseason, we're a week away at this point. So I think now you're not really going to make those changes. Like, what are you going to even do? Like, put Trey back at the top and Mookie third? Like, there's a reason you switched that in the first place. So I think now you just got to settle in at this point.
Yeah, one other guy to mention is Gavin Lux. He's been fantastic, still keeping it up. 342 batting average, 419 on base, and 500 slug over the last 2 weeks. So he has been fantastic. Bellinger and Taylor both struggling. I know somebody in the chat joked that Bellinger stock up because he didn't strike out in the last couple of weeks. Definitely
And
Bellinger stock up for the
hair.
haircut. Yeah. I know I saw some tweets, some analysis from Daniel on the Bellinger haircut. So, hey, it can't hurt, it would just try whatever you need to try.
As someone who had long hair for a while and cut it off similar to Bellinger, I just know how much better that feels, like, as far as just comfort and not being itchy and not sweating as much. So I don't know if it'll help on the baseball field. I know there's probably some superstitious reasons that he decided to cut it, but hey, when you're going as bad as he's gone this season, you'll try anything. So I'm glad he finally did it, at least. Like, who knows? Maybe it'll lead to something.
Yeah. And I mentioned Taylor. I mean, that's the hard one because he's the guy I kept assuming, at some point he's going to turn this. At some point. It just hasn't happened. I mean, it's not to say I'm going to count him out of getting a big hit in a big moment. We'll talk again in a little bit about who your starting outfield is, but that's a struggle. So let's get to the biggest one. When we're talking about stock up and stock down, I think the biggest headliner here, the stock down category, is Walker Buehler. So he pitches on Thursday, 3 2/3, 5 earned runs, just 2 strikeouts, did have no walks, but I look at his September numbers. Do you know what his ERA is in the month of September, Daniel?
Probably pretty high.
7.32. 7.32. He's allowed 16 earned runs in 19 2/3. He's just struck out just 13 guys. So 13 guys in basically 20 innings. The Dodgers have lost 3 of his last 4 appearances. You're a guy that, I mean, we all like Bellinger. You've been especially high on Bellinger. This is a guy that's at the beginning of the year was a fascinating year because at the beginning of the year, his numbers, Buehler. Yes, I'm sorry. Did I say something else?
I'm not high on Bellinger.
Buehler. Excuse me. It's funny that I confused those two as we're talking about his last month. I mean, just a Freudian slip there, I guess. But Buehler had fantastic numbers to start, and I was the guy saying, hey, the underlying metrics here are not good. They're not good. They're not good. And we knew it was going to go one of two directions. Either the underlying metrics were going to catch up and the ERA was going to be bad, or he was going to fix the underlying metrics. Well, he fixed the underlying metrics. He was the favorite for the Cy Young for a while. Now, over the last month, he has fallen well out of Cy Young contention. I'm sure he'll finish in the top 5, maybe 7. But the last month has been brutal. So as we head into, we talk about Seeger, the month is turning to October. He's getting ready. Urias, the month is turning. He's getting ready. Buehler's the other guy on that list. He's been really, really bad. So what have you made of Buehler, not just on last Thursday, but over the last month and kind of how you're feeling about him heading into the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's both sides of the argument, right? Like there's definitely reasons to be concerned. Like he's at, I think he's around 195 innings right now. He's going to go over 200 innings. He's never done that before. So I think the first thing you go to is like, oh, he's tired. He's fatigued. It's late in the season. He's pitched. He's made every start. He hasn't missed any time this year. There was a while there where he was going 6+ innings in every single
Yeah.
start. So, he could be a little worn down. I think the velocity has been down a tick. You mentioned the strikeouts are down. He's missing fewer bats than he was, previously when he was dominating. So that's all reason to be concerned. And I am concerned, but I still think like at the end of the day, like there's a part in my head that it's Walker Buehler. Like when the lights are brightest, he shines the most. Like we've seen what he does in October time and time again. Like he's done it every year and he's still super young. So part of me thinks like he could still flip that switch and be dominant in October. I just wish there was a point somewhere in the season where they could have, throw him on the IL for a couple weeks, skip him a couple times to limit those innings a little bit, because I definitely think we're seeing the effects of that right now.
Yeah, and Buehler is the only guy, by the way, scheduled to make 2 starts this week. So if you're talking about, somehow getting him a rest, he is going to get the least rest of any Dodger pitcher over the next 7 weeks. He's scheduled to start tomorrow against Yu Darvish, and he's also tentatively scheduled for the last day of the season. So that's a huge storyline because, again, as we'll talk about in a minute, Buehler is obviously going to be pitching in huge games for the Dodgers. You hope, assuming they're big games this week, but then if assuming and hoping you make it past the wild card, I don't assume they're going to make it past the wild card, hoping they make it past the wild card, Buehler would likely be lined up to be your guy in game number 1. And so that's a fascinating thing to watch. So let's have that conversation now, because this is where Matt and I got into a little bit of a disagreement last week, which was fun, is how do you shake out the Dodgers rotation? So I think everyone's pretty clear that Max Scherzer is clear, far and away, the number 1 pitcher for the Dodgers. As bad as September has been for Walker Buehler, I think the argument was always between Scherzer and Buehler for number 1. And so Buehler is still, I think, comfortably in number 2. In my estimation, Julio was clearly comfortably number 3. He has been fantastic this year. And Clayton Kershaw is clearly comfortably number 4. Matt had Kershaw ahead of Urias. So I'm curious how you see those 4 guys shaking out. Of course, Tony Gonsolin's been getting some outings if you want to move him into the rotation and Urias into the bullpen. But folks joining us on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, wherever you're joining, I'd love to hear how you would shake out a 4-man playoff rotation. Daniel, I'll start with you. I've got Scherzer, Buehler, Urias, and Kershaw. What do you say?
Yeah. So I think it's a complicated question just because obviously if the Dodgers are in the wild card game, they're not going to have the luxury of setting their order. And also, just the way
actually
things
here,
are
let me interrupt you real quick because I do think the scheduling piece of this actually helps. So the way that the Dodgers rotation is set, assuming they are playing in a wild card game, Max Scherzer would start the wild card game. That would be 2 days after the season, and then 2 days after the wild card would be game 1 of the National League Divisional Series. So any of the Dodger pitchers could then start that game on normal rest, likely Walker Buehler, but Scherzer would not be able to come back on normal rest until game 3. So the big question is, Julio or Kershaw, who would you throw in game 2 of the NLDS is a fair one. And they're both lefties, so it's not like do we want the lefty or the righty more? So just to set it up a little bit more, I do think that's helpful.
Right. So I have 2 different answers, one for a 5-game series and one for a 7-game series. So since the NLDS would be 5 games, I think I'm with you. I would order it the same way you would. So let's say Scherzer throws the wild card game, they win that. I'd go Buehler game 1 and Julio game 2, and then Scherzer game 3, and then Kershaw game 4. I think that's just because everyone, other than your game 1 guy, everyone's only throwing 1 game, first of all. So it doesn't matter a whole lot. But if Julio is throwing game 2, then he's available in game 4 or game 5 to come out of the bullpen, which we've seen him do that just last year. Like he starts a game early in the series and then he closes out the clinching game or whatever. I definitely trust him a lot more coming out of the bullpen than Clayton Kershaw. I don't want to see Clayton Kershaw out of the bullpen at all this postseason, not only because it hasn't worked in the past, but also just because he's just coming off the injury. Like he's not even all the way built up yet. It was an elbow injury. That's not something to mess around with. So he's got a routine. He's a starter. I'd keep him in that role. I'm not bringing him out of the bullpen at all. So for that reason, I would go Julio game 2.
Okay, so here's an interesting question from the four Roblox buds. Um, Suggesting, so Paul is asking, who do you start against the Cardinals? I think it's a very easy answer. Max Scherzer is
It's
your guy.
not.
It's
Yeah.
lined up. The whole thing is set up. Now, of course, they could bump Buehler if they wanted to, but I think the gap between those two is comfortably Scherzer. The Roblox asks, does Scherzer go 7 and Urias 2? Is Urias your closer in the wild card game? Or
I mean, I still think if Max Scherzer goes 7, you still got
Trinan and
Blake
Kenley?
Trinan for the 8th and Kenley for the 9th. I still think you could go to your normal guys there. I would have Julio in the bullpen ready to go. Maybe guys get on base, or if Kenley's
Is he
not
your
looking right,
third? I mean, is he the third
he,
guy that
he,
you
he would
trust?
be he would be my third guy probably after Kenley. Um, but with that being said, I don't think you need to start getting too cute there. Like at the end of the day, the wild card game, yes, you want to win it. It's do or die. But even if you do win it, you still got a plan for after
Yeah.
that. So I in a perfect world, you don't even have to use Julio at all. But I definitely would have him in the bullpen and ready to go as that third guy
Yeah, I mean,
after the two main guys trying Henley who have been great. Like I think you
right.
have to trust those guys at this point.
Yeah, because to your point, right? Like, so how big of a gap do you believe there to be between Julio and a guy like Joe Kelly or a guy like Corey Knebel coming out of the bullpen? And even if you say, hey, I trust Julio 10% more than I trust those guys, is that 10% more worth basically throwing away the guy that you were going to have
Right.
start? Now, again, the way the NLDS shakes out, because you have Kershaw in game 2, you could easily have Julio in the bullpen there. And then if you need to use him, he just pitches game 4 in the NLDS. So I suppose there's a way to shake that out, but I'm with you. I mean, he's definitely not ahead of Trinan or Kenley Jansen for me. I mean, I guess
Right.
maybe if you wanted a lefty, and we just talked about how you don't really trust any lefties. So maybe he's the first lefty out of the pen if they've got second and third and a left-handed guy up. I don't know what that would look
Right.
like, but it's interesting there. One other question for you on the rotation. Assuming that the division remains in play. So let's just hypothetically say there is no point in the year from here on out in which the Dodgers, let's say they cut it to one game at some point, and that entire Milwaukee series, they are one game behind the Giants. I imagine it's full throttle, go for it to win the division. You're not thinking about pulling Buehler out of his last start or kind of messing with some of that rotation. Is that accurate?
No, yeah, I think if the division is obtainable, you still have to keep fighting. I know a lot of people have said, maybe they should start taking their foot off the gas, rest guys. We just spoke about the fatigue, the innings that Julio and Buehler are at. But I don't think, sitting them out one start or having one shortened start, like that's not making a huge difference, I don't think. And I think, baseball is such a weird sport. Like you might be 3 games out going into the final weekend and the Giants lose all 3 and you win all 3. And then you're right there. So I think if it's obtainable, you have to keep fighting. I think once it's maybe not obtainable anymore, then you could start doing some other things like Bueller's still to start the last game of the season. If you're going into that 2 games out, it's over.
Yeah.
Well, then you could either rest him for the wild card game if you want, or for game 1 of the next series, or you could have him make like a shortened start on that Sunday, maybe throw 2 or 3 innings just to stay sharp, but it's also a lot shorter, so his arm would be fresh for the next game. But I think just baseball is such a weird sport. You can't start giving up on the division until it's over with.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if we were talking about a scenario where the wild card was the way that it should be, something where the first place wild card team had a massive advantage over the second place wild card team, then maybe you don't have to be as sort of worried about that scenario. The way that it's set up, you absolutely full throttle ahead to try and win the division until it is. I mean, even if you're 2 games back with 2 games to go, you push all your chips into the middle. Now, if you get to the last game of the season and Buehler's scheduled to start and the game is meaningless, of course Walker Buehler doesn't start that game, not because you're saving him for the wild card, but just because, hey, give the guy a break, let him rest his arm. Somebody in the chat here from YouTube, which, by the way, throw some questions in there because in just a minute we're going to take some questions. But Roblox asked this question, and I think it's a good one, basically suggesting Urias could also be the piggyback to a guy like Scherzer in the wild card if hypothetically things were to go south for him or he were to get injured or something like that. Urias could be absolutely the first guy. As you said, you probably don't want Kershaw in that position coming off of injury. And Scherzer obviously would have started the game. Buehler would have pitched just 2 days before, assuming things go that way. Obviously, you have a righty on the mound, then you switch to a lefty. So I think that's another fair thing is that look, none of us, if things go south with Scherzer in the wild card game, I'm not sure it matters who else is coming into the game next
Yeah,
because it's
it's
probably
true.
bad news. But I think the
Yeah.
Urias move there is probably a fair thing.
Yeah, but I also think in a situation like that, like definitely early, like you'll pitch Julio in that game. I might order it a little differently. Like let's say Scherzer's in a big jam and it's 2 on and 2 out. I might go to Trinan right then and there because
Yeah.
I'm not bringing Julio into that situation. And then you could go Trinan and Kenley in the middle innings or whatever, and then have Julio throw the last 2 or 3 or plan to. And if he doesn't have it, then you start going to other guys. But that's kind of what we saw in the postseason last year, right? Like Julio was the guy closing it out and throwing multiple innings to do so. And he thrived in that role. So I think that's another option as well. And I think that's what I would do, just because you're not going to bring him into a situation where it's 2 on and 2 outs. And in a wild card game, it's a quick trigger. You can't sometimes you can't afford to have those 2 runs come in. So you might have to make a move quicker than you think. And Julio, he's a starter. He's going to take longer to get ready. Trinan, obviously we've seen him thrive in roles where he comes in with guys on base and gets out of jams. That's what he's done all year. So I think that's kind of how I would order it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Creative Killer asks, what about it if they have to play a game 163? So what if you have to play the Giants literally the day after the season ends for the division? Max Scherzer would then pitch that game still on normal rest. Let's say,
Right.
worst case scenario, you lose that and then go to the wild card. That's where it gets fascinating.
Well, that's when Julio's probably your starter at that point.
well, but the thing about Julio is he would have pitched 2 days prior. He'd be only on 2 days rest. The guy who would
Is he
return
supposed to start Saturday or Friday?
So I've got the rotation currently listed as Buehler on Tuesday, Scherzer on Wednesday, Gonsolin on Thursday, Kershaw Friday, Urias Saturday, and Buehler on Sunday.
So it would be Kershaw.
Well,
then.
it would be Gonsolin on normal rest or Kershaw on short rest. So I mean, I think we all know how that would play out. But that's how.
Oh, well, if Kershaw throws Friday, then by Wednesday he would be on normal rest.
Well, but so game 163 would be the very next day after the season, would be Monday, and then the
Right,
wild card would
the
be
wild
Tuesday.
card game is still it's Wednesday still. The wild card game is Wednesday no matter what.
Okay, I thought the wild card game was Tuesday. So I thought it was 2 days after the season. But we could check on that. But that would be, I mean, so either way, you're looking, that's what's fascinating there, is Scherzer pitches then. And again, if you get to that point, the assumption is that Buehler has pitched on the final day of the season, and you'd be left in a spot where either it's Gonsolin on normal rest or Kershaw, or if it's as you say, if it is Wednesday, then you would
Wednesday.
have, okay.
It's Wednesday.
Perfect. So then you would have Kershaw in normal rest. So there you go, which would be fascinating. Okay, let's get to some questions here. There's some good ones. The first one from Craig is, do you start Gavin Lux? This dovetails into another conversation that Matt and I had. When you look at the Dodger lineup, I'll frame the question a little bit different, but we're asking the same thing as Craig is. The infield is set, which Will Smith is catching. Right. He should be catching every game. I swear on everything that I know and love, if Will Smith is not starting or catching Max Scherzer in the most important game of the season, you're not gonna see me on this show. I'll just say it. I will say mean things and I just won't do it. But Will Smith is catching. You got Muncy at first. You got Trey Turner, Corey Seeger, Justin Turner. You got those 5 set in stone. You know Mookie Betts is going to be in the outfield. The question that Matt and I debated is, who are your 3 outfielders and how do you arrange them? Matt, a week ago, to be fair, was still on Cody Bellinger in center field. My opinion was, I understand the hesitancy to put a guy like Mookie Betts in center field, even a guy like Trey Turner in center field. I basically said, when the playoff come around, I don't care. There's no more reasons. Like, you put Trey Turner or Mookie Betts in center field. If it were me, I put Mookie Betts in center field, and I say AJ Pollock and Gavin Lux, you guys play rock, paper, scissors for who can play left field and who can play right field. I'm guessing they're not going to experiment with Gavin Lux in center field in the middle of a postseason run. That's just me. But for me, maybe it's Trey Turner. You throw him out there and Gavin Lux plays second. Whatever it is, Lux and Pollock have to, regardless of who's pitching, as far as I'm concerned, have to be the other 2 guys. Do you agree with that?
Well, over the weekend, Gavin Lux was playing center field in Arizona and actually made some nice plays out there.
Fair.
So
I saw the first game he didn't have like a single ball hit to him or something like that. So
yeah, well, I think it was on Saturday. He had a nice play in the right center field.
Love it.
Like right in front of the wall. And I was like, wait, that's Gavin Lux out there. That was great. So I don't know if you.
So there you go. Daniel's putting Gavin Lux at center field. Well, sign him up.
I'm getting there, but I don't know if you could trust him in a 1-game playoff do or die. That's a little sketchy. Center field's a pretty important position, but hey, they trust him enough to play him in games right now, which they're not one game playoffs, but these games are all really
Yeah.
important, right? So they trust him enough. With that being said, I think AJ Pollock deserves an everyday spot at this point. I think he's got to be in the lineup no matter what. He's been he was on my stock up. I talked about him already. I don't need to say anymore. He's been great. I think you said Lux every day. I think I'd probably amend that to a little Lux Taylor platoon. I don't
Mm.
know if I want Lux in the lineup against lefties. I think Taylor's still probably a better option against left-handed pitching. He's a better defender. There's
Yes.
no doubt
Yes.
about that. But I still think Gavin Lux, if a righty's on the mound, he needs to be in the lineup the way he's been hitting. So I'd have him out there. I think I'm with you. I'd prefer Mookie in center. But I'm curious to see, if they'd be willing to do that. I know Lux, like I just said, he made a nice catch. He's looked okay in center. I just don't think you could trust him in a do or die situation there. So I'd probably move him over to right or left or whatever and try to get Mookie in center. But if they don't want Mookie in center because of his hip or whatever, and I know he's played there a little bit, but they haven't really been like they played Gavin Lux there before him.
Yeah.
So that kind of tells me something. They probably want to keep him in.
Although
right.
Mookie, I believe that first game, and I was traveling Saturday, but I think it was Friday, or maybe it was Thursday. But Mookie ended the game in center. Like at some point, Gavin.
Right.
So to me, that shows the willingness to at least put him out there. And again,
Right.
I'm not discounting the importance of defense in center field. My argument has always been the gap in defense is not even close to the gap in offense. And here's what I hear you. Like, I think Taylor, it's fascinating to me because this is gonna. I think I would. I think I would rather have Bellinger than Chris Taylor in the lineup. Like Chris Taylor. Like I'll say this: the greatest thing that's happened to Chris Taylor over the last 2 months is Cody Bellinger because nobody's paying attention to how bad Chris Taylor has been. Chris Taylor in the month of September has an OPS of 341. That's on base percentage plus slugging percentage. That's not one of those numbers. It is both combined. In August, it was 666. So he has, we know how good he was in April, OPS 875, May 902, June 705, July 988. The last month and a half, and he's injured. Like, I'm not saying he should be better. I'm just saying, like, when you look at every time we do stock up, stock down, I go look how the last 2 weeks, how the last 30 days been. Those two guys every single month have been at the bottom, and Bellinger's ahead of Taylor. This might be the first time all season, and it's like 29th and 30th, so it's not like he's way higher. But Bellinger's a better defender than Taylor. So in my estimation, I guess the only pushback I would give is, while I don't trust either of them offensively, I would say I trust Taylor a little more offensively, but I trust Bellinger way more defensively than Taylor. And that's not a knock on Taylor. It's more of a pro on Bellinger. He can play center field, which leaves Mookie in right. It leaves your defensive alignment a little bit more the way you would like it. Pollock in left field. So am I crazy for saying Bellinger over Taylor? Obviously, you picked Taylor. I'm not agreeing with Matt. I would throw Lux out there every single day and say, no matter how bad he is against lefties, it's not as bad as either of these other two guys.
Yeah, I honestly didn't include Bellinger just because he's still hurt. Like, he's on the IL right now. Who knows when he's going to be back? And I don't know if I'm going to activate him off the IL and throw him into the lineup for a wild card game. Like, that's not what I'm going to do. Maybe as the postseason goes along, I still would have him on the roster. He could be a late game defensive replacement or whatever. And maybe as the postseason goes along, he gets more healthy, and then who knows? Maybe he catches lightning in a bottle and gets hot for a couple weeks, which didn't happen all season. And I will say he's had stretches where he has like a three game stretch where he hits a couple home runs, and it's like, all right, here we go, and then he goes cold again. But hey, in the postseason, I would take that. If Cody Bellinger gives the Dodgers one good 3-game stretch this postseason, I think all of us would absolutely take that after the season he's had.
Yeah.
But for me with Chris Taylor, though, I think the question is just, is he healthy or not?
Yeah.
And you mentioned how bad the numbers are. I don't know if he was healthy or not. He was been dealing with a neck issue, which obviously isn't fun for anyone. I know I've slept wrong and my neck's been sore before, and that whole day sucks. You can't even walk. So I don't know how much of a factor that is in his struggles. I know he's been struggling for a while now. Like, it's not like it's something that just started happening, but who knows? Like, is he healthy? And if he is, maybe he could get back to what he was, because the guy was an all-star. Like, he's been great for a majority of the year. And I think that's why I'm probably still willing to include him in the lineup more than Bellinger's, because we've at least seen it from him, and we saw it for an
We've
extended
seen it
period
this
of
year.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. This year, of course, obviously,
3 or 4 months ago. But
Bellinger
yeah,
does
which
not
is
have
fair.
in his trophy case. But this year, we haven't really seen it from him. Whereas Chris Taylor, he's been bad over the last month or two, but he was great for a majority of the year. Sometimes with him, he's a streaky hitter, so maybe he has a minor tweak. He's got a very hard swing, a very vicious swing. So that kind of leads to strikeouts and slumps here and there. But when he gets hot and when he's going right, as we saw early in the year, he's great. So I'm not quite willing to give up on Chris Taylor, but the numbers are definitely not great. And I think
Yeah.
if a righty's on the mound, which like if they make the wild card game, they're going to be facing Adam Wainwright, who's a righty. So in that scenario, Gavin Lux is going to be in the lineup for me, and then Chris Taylor's another guy that you have off the bench to pinch hit or as a late inning defensive replacement, like we saw over the weekend in Arizona. I think it was the Saturday game or whatever, where they put Chris Taylor in left field as a defensive replacement for AJ Pollock in the 9th inning, and he makes 2 diving catches to basically save the game. And Pollock, in the post-game interview, Pollock even said, like, I probably don't make those catches. So thankfully Chris was out there. So that's another weapon you have, if he's not in the lineup.
Yeah, and again, Abe points out Jeff must not remember when Taylor made the catch against the Brewers in the NLCS in 2018. I think Chris Taylor is good at defense. I am just saying, like, if we're going to take a 0 on offense, which I unfortunately would classify both of those guys as based on the last 7 weeks of evidence that we have. In Bellinger's case, to your point, it's more than 7 weeks. It's 7 months. But if I'm taking a 0, then I would much rather the guy who's a better defender, which is Bellinger, and I would much rather the guy that's most comfortable in center field, which allows Mookie to play right and Pollock to play left, which they are far more comfortable in. So for those reasons, now, to be fair, is Bellinger even available? Is a fair question, because as you said, he's currently on the injured list. Jason kind of hints at this. What do you do with your bench spots in this scenario? So we've both got Lux and Pollock we'll just pencil them in against righties.
Right.
Barnes is on the playoff roster. Pujols is on the playoff roster. That probably leaves 2 more bench spots, maybe 3. So if Bellinger's healthy, are you taking Bellinger? If Taylor's healthy, are you taking Taylor? And then if you do take a 5th guy, who's the 5th one for you?
I think the 5th guy would probably be Matt Beatty. He gives you another lefty bat off the bench who you don't really trust his defense, but in a pinch hitting scenario, he doesn't strike out as much as some other guys. I don't know if you're in a rush to send Bellinger up as a pinch hitter if he's one of the guys on your bench.
Yeah.
You definitely want him as a defensive replacement. But let's say it's the 8th inning, you're down by 1 run, 2 on 2 outs with a righty on the mound. I don't know if I want Bellinger going up there in that spot. I think I'd rather have a guy like Beatty who, at least is probably going to make contact. So I think I'd go with him. To be honest, I don't even know what other candidates there are at this point. I feel like the Dodgers have cycled some guys in and out, but no one's really been able to make an impression at all.
Yeah, and I mean, looking back, even in 2020, they actually took 6 position players on their bench into that series. Obviously, the DH was there, which you would think actually would make you take less, but, with Dave Roberts, who knows? But, yeah, to your point, I mean, because with the thought being, if you have 4 starters that you trust in a 5-game series, plus maybe you take a guy like Gonsolin or David Price, who's your long relief type, then you don't feel the need to have all of these extra bullpen arms necessarily out there. But to your point, like, who's to say? We can't even get to 5 that we necessarily like, let alone 6. And a guy like McKinney, who maybe you say, look, he can't hit, but he's a defensive guy. Well, you've already got Taylor and Bellinger plugging the can't hit but can play defense role, so you don't need another one of those. A guy like Keibert Ruiz, who maybe you bring up as a 3rd catcher, he's no longer around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I mean, like in the past, they've brought up a 3rd catcher, but there's not a 3rd catcher that you trust. I don't even know. Like, someone was joking. If somebody got hurt, I have no clue who the 3rd catcher would be if somebody got hurt. I don't want to know who the 3rd catcher would be. But yeah, I mean,
I think it's Tim Federowicz.
FedEx is still in the house, huh? But yeah, so I mean, Beatty, I'm with you again. Like, people, nobody's tried to rub it in my face, but I'm like, look, Beatty, has he been bad? Yes. He's hitting like 220 with a 300 on base percentage. I hate to break it to you. Both of those are double what Taylor and Bellinger have been giving us. And so you can hate all of you want. I never said Beatty was going to be an all-star. I just said it was going to be a more competent at bat, which I think it has been. But yeah, beyond those guys, I mean, I suppose there's a world where they find, do they have some speedster on the 40-man roster that I don't know about? Like, they've done that route, not that I know of.
Yeah.
So who knows? Who knows? You would imagine that it would be 5 bench
I
bats, and you
guess
just say,
probably the next guy after that would be Zach McKinstry, but
"Oh,
we haven't seen him in weeks.
yeah,
And I don't think I'd have to look at the AAA numbers, but I don't think he's been tearing it up by any means. And he also he's a utility guy, but you also don't love his defense, so I
yeah."
don't really know like what purpose he would serve on a roster. You know?
Yeah, because Taylor's already your backup middle infielder, and obviously
Yeah.
Beatty can kind of play the corners. Pujols can play first, and then obviously you've got 100 outfielders there. So interesting question. Yeah, Jason says Zach McKinstry as well, but yeah, to your point, like, yeah, Paul jokes that Kenley Jansen's the number 3 catcher in the Dodger organization right now, so that might be the case. Um, we kind of mentioned, I mean, we'll talk this now. The Cardinals have won 16 in a row. 16 in a row for the Cardinals, which is an absurd stat. It's worth they took 2 out of 4 from the Dodgers when they played at the beginning of the month. The Dodgers beat them the first 2 times around, and then the Cardinals came back and took the last 2 in that series. Wainwright won the Wednesday game. He's moved to 15-7 at that point. That's hilarious. I mean, so when the Dodgers beat them on September 7th, the Cardinals were 69-68. They were 1 game over 500. They are currently 18 games over 500, and it has been, what's that, 20 days? 19 days. 19
weeks.
days. 19 days. They lost 1 to Cincinnati, the opener of the very next series, and then have not lost since. So, I mean, again, we could talk about how much we hate the wild card. You hate it even more when it's against a team that's won 16 games in a row in the Cardinals. And on one hand, you say, hey, credit to them. Like, this is a team that you feel like at least deserves to be in the postseason. For a while there, it was going to be some garbage team that lost 7 of their last 9 instead of 9 of their last 9 and limped into the playoffs. At least it's a competent opponent.
Right.
But you're facing a guy who's going to probably be a top 3 Cy Young finisher, Adam Wainwright. And that's not what you like to see if you're the Dodgers. Now, you did just see him. You took 2 out of 4. Even against Wainwright, you kind of got to him. He gave up a few runs in that one, which is not his norm, of course. But how do you feel knowing that that's most likely going to be the matchup that they face? So Wainwright in that one. Well, I guess, yeah, Wainwright went 8 1/3, but he gave up 4 earned runs in that one. So, I mean, I can't imagine a Dodger fan likes that, feels good about that matchup, right?
Well, no, and St. Louis. St. Louis also has a guy by the name of Paul Goldschmidt who's absolutely on fire right now, and us Dodger fans know he tormented us for years. So that's definitely not a guy you want to see, who's swinging the bat well this time of year. Like you said with the Wainwright, I think the 4 runs he gave up like 2 or 3 of those were in the 9th inning, but he dominated for most of that outing. Like he pitched into the 9th inning,
Yep.
And he's been great all year. So definitely don't feel great. The Cardinals are playing well right now, but with that being said, I still think the Dodgers are more talented than any team. I think you could, match them up against any team, and I still think they're going to win, especially when you got Max Scherzer on the mound. Like, you feel good anytime. The Dodgers have not lost
100%.
a single game that guy has pitched this year, so you feel good there. But with that being said, it's the Cardinals, like we've seen, kind of like the Giants, just like the crap that happens with
Yeah.
them, like a blue pit here, a blue pit there, and you lose, or like a big homer or whatever. So it's not fun playing the Cardinals, but that's the reality of this situation. It's gonna happen. You're just gonna have to go out there and play your best baseball. And I still think, as scared as we are to play the Cardinals, like if you're on the Cardinals and you're sitting there saying we gotta face Max Scherzer in a lineup full of 8 all-stars, like that can't be fun for them either, you know?
Yeah, and somebody points out Scherzer pitched the day before, and he went 8 innings, 6 hits, no earned runs, 13 strikeouts. So, advantage
Pretty good.
there. Pretty good there. And I think you make a good point. We only see things from the Dodger perspective, but if you're a Cardinals fan, A, you're just happy to be there because 2 weeks ago you thought you were on the outside looking in. But B, then you look up and say, freaking A, we got to face Max Scherzer, arguably the best pitcher in baseball alive right now. Not to mention the best lineup in baseball right now. Not to mention a bullpen behind them with guys that are on fire. So you got to feel good. Now here, let me throw this at you. Here's a little narrative for you. How sweet would it be? I like to think of who would I like to play in the playoffs. The number one factor on who I would like to play is who it will hurt me the least to lose to. So, like, some people are like, oh, I'd love to play the Giants in the postseason. For me, it's like I would hate it because if we lose to the Giants, it would literally be my nightmare. But if you want to go narrative route, how nice would it be to knock off the Cardinals in the wild card, to knock off the Giants in the divisional series. And from there, it's just gravy. I mean, whether it's the Brewers or whoever. I mean, the Brewers, they've had some battles, although the Dodgers have typically won those battles. But that would be a nice little stretch to be able to break away from some demons against the Cardinals and then, stomp little brother in the mud and beat the Giants in the NLDS.
Yeah, that would definitely be nice. But like you said, like losing a one game playoff to the Cardinals, that's like they're probably second after the Giants in the NL as
Yeah.
teams at least want to lose to, like you said. So that wouldn't be fun. But you're right, the satisfaction would definitely be more. It's kind of a similar conversation to who would you want to play in the World Series, and you got some people who say, I want to play the Astros, I want to beat them once and for all, and prove that we're better than them and get that revenge. And then there's some people saying, I don't want to play the Astros because I don't want to risk losing to them again, because that would just be
100%.
literally the worst thing in the world. So yeah, it's kind of similar, but it definitely would be more satisfying to knock out the Cardinals after they had this magical run. They won 20 straight or whatever, and then just say, well, that was all for naught because we just sent you home in one game. And then the Giants, they had this magical season, won the division, earned it, won 106 games or whatever. Well, we send you home in the NLDS. Like that'd be pretty nice. I'm not gonna lie.
Absolutely. Okay, just a few minutes left, so let's break down this week ahead. 3 games against the Padres. Walker Buehler on the mound for the Dodgers against Yu Darvish. Scherzer and Gonsolin closing out the series. The Padres rotation is an absolute disaster, so a lot of TBDs on the back end of that. And who knows? I mean, now that they've been eliminated, I imagine a guy like Darvish is still going to pitch, but from there, it could get dicey. Then the final 3-game series against the Brewers, Kershaw, Urias, and Buehler. Again, the Brewers have literally nothing to play for. They've already clinched a division. They cannot get to the number 1 seed. So they are stuck exactly where they are. From your not thinking about the Giants at all, as you look at those 6 starters, what do you need from the Dodgers? Well, we need 6 wins, but realistically, like, is 5 wins like a reasonable expectation for those 6 games?
Honestly, for me, it's not about the wins or losses. To me, at this point, I want to see them play well. Like they took 2 out of 3 to the Diamondbacks, or against the Diamondbacks just now, and 2 out of 3 against the Rockies, which that's not bad. They won 4 out of 6. I think we said 5 out of 6, or hopefully 6 out of 6. So they fell short of that. But I just think overall they didn't play very well, and you don't feel very confident going into a 1-game playoff when every other day, you don't know what you're going to get out of this offense. Is the average starting pitcher on the other team going to take a no-hitter into the 6th? Are we going to get any hits with runners in scoring position, et cetera? I just want to see them play well. Like I said, the way the Giants are playing, the Dodgers could go 6-0 and still not win the division. I definitely think you probably have to go 6-0 if you want to have a chance, because with the Giants schedule, they play the Diamondbacks and then they finish up against a Padres team who at that point definitely won't have any motivation. Like, they're already eliminated, but I still think they're going to be motivated to play the Dodgers because they view the Dodgers as their rival, and that's literally their World Series. Like, that's all they have to play for at this point. But I think after that series, they'll kind of winding down and kind of over it. They don't really have the same disdain towards the Giants, so I think they'll kind of lay down there. So even if the Dodgers go 6-0 and the Giants, win 5 of 6, you don't really have a choice there. But I just want to see the Dodgers play well. I want to see them maybe not firing on all cylinders, but let me at least feel better about more guys in the lineup than Corey Seager and Trey Turner,
The bats is huge. I agree with you on that one. One thing we didn't get to, and we'll get to here at the end. I mean, looking at the Giants, obviously some news today that Brandon Belt has fractured his thumb. They don't know how long he's going to be out. I think somebody mentioned that Ruff might be hurt too. I haven't kept up to speed on that, but how big of an impact do you see those 2 injuries having on the Giants, especially down the stretch? I mean, with those 2 guys missing, is a 3-3 record from the Giants over the final 6 not too much to ask?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see though. That's definitely a big loss. Brandon Belt has been probably their best player in the second half. Feels like every time, like I'm looking at the Giant score, it shows that he hit a homer or whatever. So that's a big loss. But with that being said, I feel like the Giants all year they've been having guys in and out of the lineup, and they've still been able to keep chugging along somehow. Like the next guy, some guy you never heard of from AAA, will come up and hit a homer or something. But I hope it's a big loss. Like you never want to cheer for an injury, and I wish Brandon Belt well, but if that's the difference and that's why the Giants go 3-3 for a week, like I'll take it because that
Yeah.
hasn't happened all year.
Yeah,
feels
if you go by how something should impact them on paper, then you haven't been following the 2021
Yeah.
Giants, because on paper, this team remained like I will go to my deathbed saying this team has overachieved. Like anybody who's
Right.
trying to say like no, look at all how good these guys are. It's like, yeah, 8 guys are having careers simultaneously. That's nothing against, like, do I believe in player development and Farhan and Kapler and all that? Absolutely. Like, that is legit stuff. But even
Right.
with all that, to say that like every single one of these guys is going to have a career year, and not just like Evan Longoria, who is one point one of the best players in baseball, is having the best year of his career. Like Lamont Wade Jr., who like nobody's ever heard of before, is like, gonna finish in the top like 15 probably in MVP voting or something. Like, it's ridiculous, some of the stuff that the Giants have been throwing. I do want to tell a funny story. You probably saw this because I think it took place on the Dodger Blue Twitter. But so one Dodger fan, I don't even know if he was cheering for the belt injury or whatever. We tweeted out about the belt being injured, and some Dodger fan posted something that was sort of like, I don't know. Let's just say it could have been perceived as laughing at or cheering for a guy to be injured. And I loved it because a Giant fan immediately jumps into the mentions and calls out this like, oh, it's terrible. I can't believe how classless you are. And then proceeds to call him a bunch of names and challenge him to a fight on Twitter. And I was just like, so we went from you're classless for laughing at somebody and cheering for an injury to my immediate response to classlessness is to, on Twitter, call somebody names that I've never met and challenge them to a fight. It was just a beautiful, everything I love about Twitter in one interaction. So I had to tell that story because that's a good one. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you would imagine that's a big injury, but I've imagined a lot about the Giants, and I've been wrong every single time. So the guy that they put in there is probably going to win the NL MVP. So, whatever you can do from there. So, hey, folks that are joining us, we appreciate you joining us. We just went over the hour mark. We appreciate you. It's been a great season. It's not over yet. We've got 6 games. We know we've got at least one playoff game, hopefully more. So just before we close, quick scheduling update. Daniel and I are going to be live on Friday night, post game against the first game against the Brewers. And then the plan is we will do a live show on Sunday night as well. So not necessarily right after the game, but Sunday around 7:30 or 8. Daniel and I will be back. Matt Moreno might be doing it with us. That'll be a sort of preview of whatever is to come. Maybe we're previewing a game 163 the very next day. Maybe we're previewing the wild card game. Maybe we're previewing the NLDS because the Dodgers have won the division by 3 games at that point.
That'd be nice.
But stay tuned. So definitely Friday, definitely Sunday. There's a chance if things get crazy and go sideways, we might do a Saturday post-game show too. But we'll see. We'll see how things play themselves out. Again, hopefully things go well and the Dodgers are in contention, and we're not talking about a Friday post-game show that the Dodgers have clinched the wild card and have been eliminated from the division. So anyways, Everybody watching, we appreciate you. Please subscribe. Please ring the notification bell. Check out Dodger Blue 1958 everywhere on social media. Check out DodgerBlue.com for all the latest. That's Daniel Starkand. My name's Jeff Spiegel. Remember, we can only say this for a couple more weeks, at least a couple more weeks. But remember, the Dodgers, 2020, still champs.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.